My name is William Sloan, and I was trained as a urologic surgeon at Johns Hopkins, and I carried on that for many years. That's how we earned our living. I grew up in Chicago, listening to Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony, and all the great violinists like Zeno Franciscati and Nathan Milstein, Isaac Stern. My father grew up in Chicago also, and he became a doctor. So I had a doctor as a father. My mother was an art appreciator. She loved the Chicago Symphony, the Art Institute. She was the one that influenced me to go to concerts and to take art lessons and music lessons. I went to Lakeview High School, which was about 2,500 students. The violin was only a small portion of what I did, and my teachers realized that I was intending to be a doctor. If you wanted to go to medical school, you had to get above a certain level, and all your friends in school were really your competitors. Had I known what I do now, I would have spent much more time on the violin, because there's always time for a youngster to spend more time and really learn the basics. You can't make up for that as an adult. I saw what a wonderful time. My friends were playing in the orchestra, and they were playing solos, and we had concerts. The orchestra conductor said, "If you will sit by my desk in the orchestra room, you don't have to play, but you can just watch. If you become interested, then you can play with us." So I said, okay. Started in the baby orchestra, and I moved up. We started in the junior orchestra, and I moved up. And in my third year, the concertmaster graduated and became a professional musician. And the young lady who was supposed to take his place there transferred schools. So he put me right into concertmaster position of the senior orchestra, and I was there for 2 years. And I loved playing the violin there. When I first started being interested in violins and bows, I was a resident at Johns Hopkins. That's in Baltimore, and I could hop on the train and get to New York in 2 or 3 hours, and visited all the famous dealers. I was probably 23 or 24 years old. Jacques Francais, he showed me a beautiful bow that was sent from his family in Paris. I looked at that and I said, it's beautiful. It's something I never will be able to afford it. He said, Beal, just take it home and pay me when you can. I bought the first violin in 1982. Make a long story short, after finishing my training at Johns Hopkins, my first job was doing kidney transplants in Toledo, Ohio. And my wife answered the phone, and one of my friends called from Chicago, Mrs. Sloan, are you still interested in buying a Stradivari? And she said, yes. She said, well, we have one. So she called me, and we got in the car, and we drove 5.5 hours to Chicago. The First National Bank of Toledo had a vice president called David Ridenauer. I remember his name, David Ridenauer. And he approved the loan for the violin. No money down for as long as I wanted to have the loan. I asked him, Mr. Ridenauer, how did you know about violins? He said, I didn't know anything. But my wife is from Cleveland. Her father is the violin maker for George Zell and the Cleveland Orchestra. So I would just call him up and say, here is the date and the name of the violin, and he would tell me, get it right away. Several years later, I went back to Chicago to have an adjustment on that violin, and they had this Jackson Stradivari on the table. It was made in 1714, when Stradivari was 70 at the peak of his career. I called Mr. Ridenauer, and I said, this is more expensive. He said, get it. So we traded in the first one, got the second one, and then 3 years later, the Guarneri del Gesù came for sale. Same dealer. It all worked together. It was just a matter of luck. I met my wife at the University of Chicago in 1963. One of my professors who remembered me from undergraduate, he called me up in the anatomy lab and said, Bill, there's a girl in our freshman class here, very bright. Second week of school, she's already singing with the Rockefeller Choir and the Chicago Symphony. She's a good pianist. You need to meet her. Within several weeks, she came to eat dinner at the fraternity house where I was living. I had left the dinner early. I went up to my room on the third floor to get the violin out to practice for the orchestra rehearsal that night. She came up the stairs and the back stairs and knocked on the door and said, "That sounds really nice. Thank you." She said, "Do you need an accompanist?" I said, "Yep." And that's in 1963 how it began. And we've been together ever since. My family was not enthusiastic to stay in Toledo, Ohio for the rest of our lives. So my daughter moved to Los Angeles. My wife got a job as a law professor in Los Angeles, and I moved to a medical practice here. My wife told me, "I've located a house in Los Feliz that I think we ought to move to." So I came over here and I said, "This is really nice." And I can't remember how many years later, I was at the hospital and my wife answered the door. A little old lady, a little old man, 90 years old. She knocks on the door and my wife said, "Well, come on in." He said, "When I was a child, I used to live here and I'd like to take a look at the house." That's how we knew this house had belonged to the previous principal cellist of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. All the famous musicians were at this house. She said, "I thought everybody had that. I didn't know this was special. I thought everybody had chamber music in the house." Because of the violins, many soloists and violinists were becoming friends with me. About 2006, we had a meeting in this house here for the Violin Society of Southern California. And in order to demonstrate the violins, we had the concertmaster coming from the Titanic Orchestra. And he was playing on the stage here. And a local violin maker here by the name of James Brown, he was president of the society. After we were finished, he said, "Bill, would you like to make a violin?" I said, I don't need to make a violin. I already have some great violins. He said, "Why don't you come out to my shop? It's about 35 miles from here in Claremont, and I'll show you how to start this." And so I went out there and we bought some tools, which cost a couple $100, and I started making this violin, and I loved it. And he said, "Why don't you call your friends, Joe Curtin and Greg Alf, and see if you can go there in the summertime and learn some more." My time off from surgery, I would go out to Claremont, I would go to Oberlin in the summer. It adds a whole new dimension to what you're doing, because you tend to have an insight in what are the physical characteristics of both old violins and new violins that make this violin so appealing to you, make it such a good concert instrument. I've completed 4 violins, and I'm working on my 5th one. This is the front of the violin. This is made of spruce. And when you start, it's just a plank here. And then you hollow it out with a chisel. That's called the graduations. The first thing you do is you make this arching very carefully, and you follow the guide, and you cut the holes here, which is called F holes. So this is just thicker than cardboard, much less. Then you have the side of the violin, which is made of maple, and this is the model. It's called the mold, on which you wrap these straight pieces of wood around here with a bending iron. You heat them up and wet them until they fit on here. So this is the back of the violin, made of maple. That you have to make the arching first. It's flat across here, as you can see, and you gouge this out. I used a drill press. On the sides, it'll be about 3.8, 3.6, so the back is thicker than the front, because it's a reflection of the front. It does not vibrating. Most of the vibrations are from the top. Almost every violin you have is 2 types of wood. Spruce for the vibrating top, and maple for the sides and the back. I started this in 2006, my first violin. Medicine is hard enough. Why am I doing something else that's hard? Just want to repeat a saying from a famous businessman in California. His name is Simon Ramo. A neurosurgeon and a violinist have nimble fingers. But that doesn't necessarily mean you ask the violinist to perform your surgery. People say that my violins will sound better in 20 years or 50 years. That doesn't help me, because I'm not going to be here to see it. If you don't have the correct ingredients, it doesn't matter how long you wait. It's not going to sound better. I don't sell any of these instruments. People can borrow them, but they're not for sale. I get an instrument, I don't sell it. They're not competing with anything that they're selling. People can borrow it. And they give it back to me when they get their own instruments. Things have changed so much. Since 2017, I had a diagnosis of amyloidosis, and so I've been under therapy since then. So I'm much less active. In 2017, I would get on the bicycle, ride up the hill, meet people. So I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. I suggest people just pay close attention to their profession and always try to improve and try to learn something. Meet people who are interesting and well-educated and see if you can include them in your family of friends. Just give them an opportunity. Let them become trusted friends, and you'll learn so many more things that you can't just get from a book or from a course. I don't have a single philosophy. Work hard, try to be honest, do the best of your ability, and see what happens. And that's happened to us. We're very lucky.